Let's go ahead and get started. And I want to just welcome everyone to our August edition of TAM IT. Tonight, our topic is MAT, Medication Assisted Treatment. This is a subject that many of us hold near and dear because of the life-saving capabilities those treatments offer so many who struggle with addiction. Tonight, we are blessed to have two of our own that are willing to share with us their experience and journey in the use of MAT and how it impacted their lives. So first, let me introduce Quinn. Quinn spent 4 years in a traditional treatment models before choosing MAT as part of her recovery, specifically Suboxone. After over a decade of struggling with opioid use disorder that progressed to IV heroin use, she suffered a near-fatal overdose that ultimately led her to take a closer look at MAT as a treatment option. To protect her anonymity, she joins us under an alias today, as the stigma of the disease and the treatment still exist. But she is here to share her experience, strength, and hope as recovery is possible. Today, Quinn has been in recovery for over 6 years thanks to MAT. Next, we also have Vivienne, and she is the mom to a daughter with almost 7 years in recovery who attends a methadone clinic. Her daughter's decision to use medication as a treatment led her to dive into her own research about MAT and the changes in the brain with OUD. It is with her daughter's permission that Vivienne joins us tonight to speak about what she has learned and help remove the stigma that still overshadows this life-saving medication. So we're so grateful for Vivienne and Quinn, and we're eager to listen and learn. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Vivienne and Quinn, and we are all ears.
Okay, so I thought we'd start with a basic, fairly simple slideshow that we share in our MAT group to new members. So I'm going to share that with you, hopefully, and launch it. And we'll just go over some things. And like Terry said, we'll hold the questions to the end, and then we'll answer some few questions. I mean, we could really spend hours on MAT, but we only have an hour, so. All right, so MAT is medication-assisted treatment. They've also started to begin calling it MOUD, medications for opioid use disorder. And you'll see that term more and more in a lot of the research studies and the literature we see today. The thing about medication-assisted treatment, a lot of people consider it almost a misnomer. Because really, for most people, the medication is the treatment. We should just call it treatment. There's studies that show groups who just do the medication without behavioral intervention do just as well as those who do the medication with behavioral intervention. Now, I'm not putting down behavioral intervention. I believe counseling for everyone's a good thing. But I think sometimes at the beginning of treatment, when people are just going into treatment, that counseling piece that often goes along with people starting medication can be a barrier to them getting treatment. It can interfere with jobs, it just can be very off-putting. I know for my daughter, she had a lot of anxiety about speaking in a group, and in the first methadone clinic she was at, a requirement was like 3 groups a week. So for some people, adding that counseling component right at the start can really be a barrier to their access to MAT. My daughter did get counseling down the road when she felt she was more ready for it, which is always an option. But it really is the medication that really helps people find success and reduces overdose and morbidity. Why MAT? When you study the disease of the brain and you understand the changes that are made to the brain, MAT just makes a whole lot of sense. MAT also reduces opioid use, drug-seeking behavior, criminal activity. There are better retention rates with those on MATs than abstinence only. And it can also reduce transmission of things like HIV and hepatitis C. So there's a lot of studies, real strong studies that show that MAT helps people find treatment and stay in treatment. Quinn, did you want to add anything to this slide?
No, I think that this covers it. I mean, it was really difficult for me at the beginning to understand why I continued to relapse. And, I had the very best treatment options that anyone could ask for. And, the studies really do show that it supplements a part of our brain that we essentially break when we abuse opioids. And so within a week of being on the medication, I finally felt like I was going to be able to, stay in recovery. And, one of the things that I think is important too about the treatment component and the social interaction, to your point, is that, when we first get into treatment, we are coming out of a very hectic lifestyle, and just getting on the medication initially is the first step. We're not ready to peel back that onion to dig deep into what our past life has been like. And so reducing that requirement for therapy right off the bat was certainly something that helped me initially. To your point, I did counseling later, but initially it was the medication that really brought me out of the lifestyle that I was in initially.
Okay. Recently, they released a study where they studied 41,000 insured patient records. They examined them, they went and examined them, and they looked at people who had had opioid use disorder, who had ODs and came to emergency rooms. And out of the findings at the 3 months and the 12 months showed that bup and methadone were associated with reduced overdose at 3 and 12 months. None of the other treatment methods showed that. And also, the longer people stayed in treatment, the lower their overdose risk. Sometimes we want to push people off their medication, but the longer they're treated with medication, the lower their overdose risk. Quinn, did you want to add anything?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. So the three medications we use in opioid treatment are methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone. Methadone has been around, I think 55, 60 years now. Buprenorphine, maybe 20, 25, I want to say, less. And naltrexone has been around in other forms, an oral form, but now it is an injectable form, which is used more effectively for opioid disorder. And that's been around, I don't know, I want to say 10 years or so, maybe. So we're going to go on and talk about these. Methadone and buprenorphine have some of the same things in common. They act on the receptors in the brain the same way as heroin, but in different ways. And I'm going to show you a slide a little bit later when we talk about methadone that will kind of explain the different ways. Both methadone and buprenorphine will reduce cravings and withdrawal symptoms. This was key for my daughter when she started the methadone clinic. She did not have this preformed notion that she was going to be a well, healthy human being down the road. She couldn't even think that far in advance. The only thing she knew was she did not want to wake up sick every morning. That was her motivation. I do not want to wake up sick. And because methadone suppresses all those withdrawal symptoms once it's in your system, you won't wake up sick. You'll stay well, and you'll feel good once you're on your regular dose. They will also, at the correct dose, block the effect of an opioid or heroin. If you are on the correct dose and you do some opioids or inject some heroin, you're really not going to feel the effects from that. Yes, some people will, and they're probably not on the correct dose. So it's a lot has to do with being on the correct dose with both, I should say, buprenorphine and methadone, for the withdrawal symptoms to go away, for the cravings to go away, to block the effects so you won't, want to buy it because you'll be wasting your money. It all has to do with the correct dose, which can be different for everybody. Quinn, anything to add?
No, I would just say that, in my previous attempts to get into recovery, I had to go to detox. I was unable to suppress my own use without being, taken away from my situation. With buprenorphine, I was, again, to your point about avoiding waking up sick, within my first couple of days, I, did not feel the horrible withdrawal symptoms that I had been used to going into recovery, which is one of the reasons why I felt that this would be, an attainable path for me. And I'll speak to a little bit more about how buprenorphine works in a minute.
Again, methadone can come in different forms, pill, wafer, or liquid. We use mostly liquid in this country, but some people do get wafers or powder that they add liquid to. You have to go to a state licensed clinic to get methadone. It can be dispensed in the doctor's office, but that is not for opioid addicted people. That is more for pain relief. And recently I read an article where they are fast tracking a weekly pill in Europe, a weekly methadone pill that is in an extra long release tablet or capsule. And what they're investigating is not so much the methadone, although they're using that medication, is that delivery system. Because really, how many other medications can people use and take once a week instead of daily or 3 times a day? So that's kind of an interesting new development. Quinn's going to talk a little bit about how buprenorphine comes.
Yep. So, and I think maybe we lost one of our slides here that had the Sublocade on it, but buprenorphine is most commonly distributed in a film or pill form that is taken under the tongue that dissolves. Within the last couple of years, we have added Sublocade, which is a long-acting injectable form of buprenorphine. You'll most commonly hear of the film or pill version by its brand names, Suboxone and Subutex. Suboxone is the form of buprenorphine that includes naloxone, and I'll speak to a little bit more about that in a moment. Subutex is the mono product. Subutex as a brand is not available anymore in the United States. However, you can still get the generic version of the mono product, the single buprenorphine product. Both forms and the injectable Sublocade have to be dispensed by a waivered physician, although with as many opioid overdoses and fatalities that we currently have in the United States, the government is actively working to reduce the barriers to get this medication. Many doctors in the United States can prescribe opioids with nothing more than a DEA number. However, to prescribe Suboxone, Subutex, and Sublocade, you do have to have an extra waiver that you have to take a class for. But we are trying to break down those barriers to give more people access to it. The naloxone that is in Suboxone, there is often a little bit of confusion around how that ingredient works. It is added to buprenorphine to reduce the instances of misuse, which is using it as an injectable or in the nose. The naloxone does not have any bioavailability, meaning it does not become an active ingredient when it is taken in the mouth. Sometimes people confuse it and think that the naloxone is the blocker, but the buprenorphine is actually the active ingredient that builds up on the receptors in the brain and keeps heroin or a full opioid agonist from activating in the brain. So the naloxone is only added to deter the misuse of the medication, either via a shot or trying to use it in the nose. But both, all three forms, you can find a prescribing physician through the SAMHSA website, or through the Suboxone or Sublocade websites. So those prescribers are easily accessible from there.
Okay.
Oh, again, so again, I kind of jumped ahead, but again, this is just explaining how the naloxone is, guarding against misuse. Subutex is primarily reserved, the mono product is primarily reserved in the United States for those who are pregnant, or who have a documented allergy to the naloxone. Sometimes the naloxone can cause some side effects in people, but they really do reserve the use of Subutex for people who have that allergy or have that are expecting. Although there have been recent studies that Suboxone is, both the combo product is safe and effective to be used in pregnancy. And so sometimes a lot of physicians now are going ahead and prescribing Suboxone to pregnant women as well. Both are considered safe for pregnancy and breastfeeding. And then I'll also speak a little bit to naltrexone. Naltrexone is a full opioid antagonist, meaning that it has a little bit of a different mechanism in the brain in how it works. You must be opioid free for a period of 7 to 10 days before taking naltrexone. There are two forms, a pill version and a long acting injection. The pill form is historically more used with alcohol use disorder. The pill form is not actually approved for opioid use disorder at this point, though some physicians will use it off-label to introduce a patient to naltrexone. After you've been, this says 10 to 14 days, but it's somewhere between 7 and 14 days. Once you have gone through detox, then you can be prescribed naltrexone. I was on it for about 7 months. I did have to go into detox to get on it, and I was one of the first patients 7 or 8 years ago that was given the naltrexone injection. It works differently in the brain. For me personally, now I know people have had wonderful success with this, a lot of my peers. It does not have the same effect in the brain that, for me anyway, that helped me with cravings. It actually intensified my cravings, and because I have a history of depression, it actually worsened that depression for me. They have since added a warning there for that medication, but I do know many people who it has worked remarkably well for, and the studies do show that after the detox period, those who take naltrexone do have good success with it. It's just, for a lot of us, and especially with fentanyl in the supply these days, it is very hard for us to get to that 7 to 14-day detox period. But it is something that has been used. The other watch out for it is that you will have no opioid tolerance at the point of taking naltrexone over time, and so it can, there is a increased risk of overdose if you do use after a period of abstinence, because your tolerance for opioids will have dropped at that point. Again, it is one of the options in the toolbox, and I do know several people who have had great success with it as well. And it does not have to be prescribed by a waivered physician. It can be distributed or given by any physician that is willing to give it.
Yeah, and I just want to add about the overdose piece. Methadone and Suboxone do keep a person opioid tolerant. So for that reason, I think you reduce your risk of overdose and morbidity by 60% when you start on methadone or Suboxone. So you just have to be careful with the naltrexone. They really suggest it for people that are highly motivated and there's no chance that they're going to think about using. But I also have read studies that up to 50% of the people who get the injection will test it. They will test to see if, in fact, they don't feel anything.
And
Which
I was one of those people, and
yes,
it can be incredibly dangerous to do
yes,
that.
and actually, though, it does help to increase the mental part of it. Well, I did use, I got nothing, so there's no sense in using again. And it's on board for 30 days. Supposedly, that's another thing you have to watch out for. The dosage can kind of wane in the last week or so, and somebody might be able to use and feel. So some people will get it every 21 days, some people 28 days, depending upon the person. So.
And one other watch out for it, I would recommend staying on it for a while. Some people, after a few months think that they're doing really well, will come off of one of these medications, and then that, of course, will trigger those cravings and that innate part of our brain that is so used to it. And so, it is recommended that, you get any of these medications that you take for a longer period of time, and not just think that you're good after a few months.
I had this conversation with someone the other day. They were talking about stopping methadone, and I feel great. I'll never use that again. And I said, well, you feel great, and you feel like you'll never use again because you're on that medication. And not to
Yep.
discourage people from trying to taper if they wish, but there's a reason you feel so great. You almost get tricked into thinking that you don't need the medication. But studies also show that some of these brain changes are long lasting, and cravings can occur years later. So it's a real difficult nut, the opioid use disorder.
Mhm.
All right, let's move along. So I think you
I
covered
think
this,
we covered
Beth.
that. Yeah, sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit.
That's all right. Okay, so methadone versus buprenorphine. Quinn talked a little bit about how they work. One is a full agonist, that's a methadone. When you stop using opioids, you've created so many receptors, and they're screaming to be filled. And that's why people who are detoxing feel absolutely awful. These will go into those receptors. Methadone will fit the receptor exactly. Buprenorphine will half fit the receptor. So that's how they get rid of the cravings and the withdrawal. They will not fill all the receptors. Some receptors will remain unfilled.
And the partial agonist part of buprenorphine, it's when we say that these are agonists, a lot of people will say, well, you can get high or you can get, euphoria from them. The receptors, once they are filled or partially filled, both of these medications are long acting. So it's not the same roller coaster that you put your body through when you are actively using one of the street drugs. And so buprenorphine kind of fits in the receptor, but it will not, after you've been on it a period of time, will not create any euphoric effect. And the similar story with methadone, as you take it and your body chemistry evens out, there is no euphoria like with one of the other full agonists.
Yeah, and I'll add that methadone, people that have longer histories and more severe histories of use will usually do better on methadone. They need that full agonist activation of their receptors to really get full relief. My daughter was on Suboxone for a period of the year, on and off, played with dosage, still used. I mean, it was once she got on methadone, for her, she felt more completely relieved. And she thought she felt pretty good on Butte, but until she got on the methadone, she didn't realize that she didn't feel as good as she could have. I'll also add that for her, she has anxiety and some depression, and the methadone can help people with those psychiatric illnesses too.
And the
And
Bupe helped my depression as well.
yeah, buprenorphine is good because it does get more people into treatment, because unfortunately methadone clinics have a horrible stigma about them, and the fact that you have to start off daily while you're getting to your dose puts people off. So buprenorphine has been good in that way to bring more people to treatment.
Yep, typically prescriptions of buprenorphine, sometimes they'll start you on a weekly dose to monitor you for a while, but for most of us, it is a monthly, visit to a doctor. But to Vivian's point, buprenorphine does have a max dosage. There is a point where taking more buprenorphine will not result in any further reduction of cravings. So there are some of us who do much better with methadone simply due to our history of use.
Methadone has a very long half-life. And this is one reason why you have to attend the clinic daily, and they bring you up very slowly, because what you take on the third day, will build up, and that all those days will build up to the fifth day, and you can't be on too much. So they take you up very slowly to a stable dose. So it's a bit of a challenge when a child first starts a methadone clinic. In most cases, they're either going to be miserable, or they're going to continue to use until they get to that stable dose. When they get to the stable dose, they're in a steady state. The narcotic blockade is achieved, and it has a higher affinity for opioid receptors. We talked about that. Oops, sorry. It's a full agonist, and it fits it perfectly. And I do have a little chart here. I really like this when I was learning about methadone. On the left, this is a person who's using, and when you're using opioids or heroin, you get a sharp spike up and then you crash down. You get a spike, then you go use, you get a spike up and you crash down. It's those ups and downs that do the damage in the brain. That's what does it. All that going up and crashing, going up and crashing. Now, this is a person on the other side on methadone. So they're on an opioid too, but they stay on a steady state. There is no ups and no downs. There's a point where when you take a dose, like with any medicine, you hit a peak, but it's not, outrageously different than your low. You don't have huge highs and huge lows. And this little X here shows actually where this person was given heroin, and you notice there's no big bump because it effectively kind of blocked any kind of euphoric effect from the heroin. So I like that slide. Kind of shows how, it's not the same as doing opiates or heroin. We're not trading one addiction for the other. The body reacts totally different with methadone than it does with short-acting opiates. Do you want to add anything here?
No, just that the buprenorphine works similarly, where you're, delivering a steady dose of medication, a safe pharmaceutical dose of medication to the brain on a regular and consistent basis. Buprenorphine is also long acting, and it's a very similar, situation in the brain.
Right.
And so we've kind of covered a little bit about this. Again, it is a partial agonist, meaning that it binds to the receptors, but not completely, so you don't feel that euphoria. There is a ceiling effect. Taking more will not result in additional effect. And so that is how it helps protect against overdose, in that some of your receptors are filled with this partial agonist. If you use a full agonist, a fentanyl or something of that nature, there are not enough available receptors to cause the respiratory depression. And, again, if you just don't feel anything if you were to use one of the medications. It is very sticky in the receptor, so that it's very hard for a full agonist to bump it off. It has a much higher affinity for the receptor. So again, if you use, not only are there not enough receptors, the heroin or fentanyl won't bump the buprenorphine off the receptor, and it does last for a few days.
I also want to add to, a few years ago, and when my daughter was on buprenorphine, I think she was prescribed at the most like 12 milligrams a day, And
That's not
doctors
enough.
seem to have right, and doctors seem to have this attitude of less is more. And you used to read this in Bupe groups too. Oh, less is more. 2 milligrams is enough. And I wonder. And now they have some research that suggests no, it should be 16, 24, particularly when you're just starting treatment. And back in the day when she was using buprenorphine, nobody was on dosages like that. So I think they've come to learn that for some of these people, you need a higher dosage of buprenorphine.
Absolutely.
Is methadone treatment effective? Methadone is still like the most effective treatment for opioid use disorder, and it's used all over the world. And the good thing about it, compared to a lot of other medicines that people take and psychiatric medicines, it's very safe. I mean, there are some side effects, sweating and constipation, low testosterone, but as far as your organs, it really is a very safe medication and can be taken for years and often is taken for years, if not a lifetime. Um, and we talked about that, prolonged treatment reduces a lot of things besides just the opioid use disorder.
And again, in terms of it being effective, there have been some very recent studies that have shown that, over the years, that the longer you are on it, the more effective it can be. Anything is going to be better than a medication or a substance that is obtained from the street. These are, tested pharmaceuticals. You are under a doctor's care. They're, in terms of overdose, it is extremely difficult to overdose while taking buprenorphine. And again, the ease of getting it, even though it has to be a waivered provider, the fact that you can go eventually monthly, and with during the pandemic, there have been even virtual providers that are available to prescribe buprenorphine that has made treatment even easier to access. We're not there yet where we would like to be. I did see a note in the chat about obtaining it on the street. There are still very many barriers to this medication, from cost to finding a provider to transportation. Sometimes people obtain it on the street because it, again, works just the same as an agonist would in suppressing those withdrawal symptoms. People may not be, in a position to spend a couple of $100s a month consistently on going to the doctor or getting there. And so it does, and again, as far as things you can obtain from the street, it is one of the more safer options because it is, prepackaged most of the time pharmaceutical, and it reduces the risk of overdose tremendously. And so that is why some people will use it to fill in between their drug of choice if it is available on the street.
We talked a little bit about this.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most powerful slides and things that we hear all of the time. Is it just trading one drug for another? I cannot explain to you what my life was like 7 years ago. I had lost my job. I had lost my child. I had lost everything that was important to me in my life. Getting on the medication was truly the most wonderful thing that has ever happened to me, because the roller coaster was over. I was under the care of a doctor. I was, putting a much safer substance into my body, and it allowed my brain chemistry the time it needed to begin to heal. And so, that is why it is much more fair to describe this period of my life as recovery or remission, because I'm not stealing anymore. I have my child back. All of those things have changed, and that would not have been possible without the medication.
And this is just refers a little bit to that. Physical dependence is different than addiction. Addiction means you're engaged in certain behaviors. Physical dependence, you're not. Many medications you develop a physical dependence. Addiction is damaging and life-threatening. When you're dependent upon a medication, you're not. Again, we talked about how important it is to be on long term. The longer you are on these medications, the better you will do. And if you do decide to taper off, studies show the longer you're on, the more success you'll have on tapering. And I'm going to just finish up. And this is an interesting quote. MAD is one of the few things that as soon as a person is stabilized, we want to get them off that medication. Where other medications like psychiatrics or schizophrenia get stabilized on lithium or whatever, we would never, never encourage them to stop taking their medication. So I think for a lot of our people, we need to get over this push to get them as soon as they're stable. You're doing so good, you don't need that medication. Because in fact, probably many of the people do.
Progressive, often fatal illnesses that we treat in this country today, almost all of them rely on some type of regular medication, from diabetes to heart disease. I have a thyroid disorder. If I don't take my daily medication, those conditions will recur. And that is very similar to this. Tapering is possible. It can be done, but it must be done incredibly slowly, pausing in between lowering the dose to let the brain try to refire some of the opioid receptors in the brain. It's definitely possible, but it should be done very slowly.
And the last slide I want to talk about, just because this is a recent, they were concerned about fentanyl and whether methadone, and there's another study involving bup as well, as whether they could be effective with fentanyl. And they discovered, yes, it could be. They may need higher dosages, and the behavioral component would also be important. And they were worried about taking fentanyl on top of the methadone being dangerous. But that panned out not to be as big of an issue as they thought as well. And they surmised that for people who are opioid dependent, they also are respiration distress. Their respiration doesn't get depressed the way somebody else's will, even if they used fentanyl on top of the methadone. So
And
most of the
yep.
right,
And that's again because the methadone or the buprenorphine is taking up the available receptor in the brain, which will, bind to it and not allow the more detrimental fentanyl to adhere to the receptor.
okay, end of slideshow.
So I think now we have some questions.
Okay. Well, I think what we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and we're going to end this up here since we're running kind of short on time. And then if y'all could stick around after we stop the recording and answer some questions, that would be great.
Absolutely.
And with that, I just want to say thank you to both of you, Quinn and Vivienne. I tell you what, Quinn, you are so inspirational to me because you're a story of hope, and you're just walking, living proof of what's possible. And I appreciate you sharing that and being with us. And Vivienne, same for you. I mean, such a warrior mom who kind of just took this and has just gone, head over heels and educating herself and learning and helping other people with this. So to both of you, we thank you so much for being here with us. And we will take some questions after we get back out of here. Okay.
Thank you
We
so much
appreciate
for
you
the
both.
opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you.